Good morning. Thanks for having me here. So, March 9th, 2019 was just like any beautiful Saturday, spring Saturday in Tallahassee, Florida. The azalea bushes were blooming and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. My wife Courtney and I had decided we'd go to Saturday Vigil Mass as a family. And Courtney had to run some errands beforehand. So we decided to take separate cars. We'd meet at church and the kids would ride with me. We were just settling into our pew 5 minutes before Mass was to start when suddenly I was out like a light. When I came to, I found myself in the back of the ambulance in the church parking lot with Father Matt Bush praying over me, who just so happened to receive the Florida State FIC scholarship out of high school. So in the paramedics trying to get an IV in me. They had just informed me that I had had a seizure, and they were taking me to the ER. Later that night, Courtney said the paramedics wouldn't let her ride in the ambulance with me, but they couldn't say no to a priest. Go figure. So they followed me. She followed me to the hospital. My sister Angela is a hospitalist physician at Tallahassee Memorial, where we live and where I was going to. And she happened to be on duty that night. So my wife called her in the car on the way to fill her in on the situation. She went from being a concerned sister to doctor mode immediately and met us in the ER upon our arrival. She ended up handpicking the ER doctor, the neurologist, and the neurosurgeon who met with us at Tallahassee Memorial. When we got to the hospital, they immediately took me back for testing. And they did a CT scan, and when the doctor came back and told us the results came back, the doctor told me the bad news. He said it looked like a mass on your right frontal lobe of your brain, a possible tumor, but they couldn't confirm it until they did a full MRI. Even though we didn't have a definitive answer, I just remember being eerily calm in that hospital room. And my first thought was, how do we fix this? And what is our plan of action? Early Sunday morning, they finally get me back to do an MRI, and at around lunchtime, the neurosurgeon comes into our hospital room. By that point, my mom and dad had arrived at the hospital with me, were in the room with me, along with my wife Courtney and my sister Angela, and our other sister Mary was watching our two children at home. My mom likes to say, all cats to the dance floor. You know, we rally around our family. Family first. So he confirmed our fears, and indeed it was a brain tumor on my right frontal lobe. He said, you have two options. I could remove the tumor here in its entirety, but I'd have to knock you out. And because it's so intertwined with the brain tissue, we wouldn't know the extent of the damage until after you woke up from surgery. You could be fine, or you might be paralyzed on your left side of your body. We just don't know. Option two is I could refer you to Shands Hospital in Gainesville, Florida, which just so happens my parents live 30 minutes away from Shands, so it was convenient, where they're performing a newer procedure called an awake craniotomy. And that's exactly what it sounds like. I'm awake the entire surgery. So basically they can see what to cut out and what not to cut out. And just so happens, I went to residency with one of the few doctors in the country that is performing just this type of surgery, and she happens to be at Shands. I've already sent her your MRI, and she agrees you'd be a perfect candidate for the surgery. Her office is expecting a phone call in the morning. We were floored. My grandmother died from a glioblastoma 10 years before, so when we heard brain tumor, our family assumed the worst. She underwent surgery to remove the tumor, but there was no such thing as an awake craniotomy when she was diagnosed in 2005. She was told she had to get her affairs in order, and she had 3 months to live. She could receive treatment, radiation and chemo, but it wouldn't help anything. And basically she'd be a guinea pig for future cancer patients. Despite the fears and the odds, she elected to receive treatment anyway. And I will be ever grateful to her for being a guinea pig, because it was courageous people like her that paved the way for the treatments I would later receive. Oh, and by the way, Grammy lived 3.5 years because of her Irish stubbornness, her cast iron stomach, and her fighting spirit. And So Monday morning, I must have called Shan's neurosurgery office at least 5 times until I got a hold of somebody. And Courtney's shaking her head, yeah. Until I was able to make an appointment. And thanks be to God, we were able to see the neurosurgeon on Wednesday for an initial consultation. The following week, I had to do an MRI where they mapped the entire brain function of my brain. And it was about a 3-hour process. I ended up having surgery the following week on March 26th. And to top it all off, when I was in pre-op about a half hour before surgery, the neurosurgeon, who's this 4'10" Indian lady, like 7 months pregnant, and she happened to be from Panama City, Florida, and she went to high school with clients of mine down there. Well, just wild. But anyway, she comes in and goes over the ins and outs of the surgery like she's done 1,000 other times. And then literally, I still remember this to this day. She looks at my chart and she says, "Oh, Spinelli, you're the odd one today." I'm like, I had a panic go through my body. Like, okay. So she went on to say, normally the majority of the people have their speech side of their brain 100% on the left or 100% on the right. Based off your MRI you did last week, yours is like 40-60. And then she went on to explain, then she asked me, "Are you ambidextrous?" And I said, "No, I throw with my right, I write with my right, I pretty much do everything with my right hand. But my brother is a left-handed pitcher, but he writes with his right hand." So, I don't know. She kind of seemed puzzled by my response, but then she went on to explain what that means is you're probably going to lose your speech temporarily, or what she called the doctor language temporary speech aphasia. But there's a slight possibility that you could lose your speech temporarily. And I literally laughed, and I just said, add it to the list, one more thing I can have to overcome. And I just laughed the whole time while she's telling me this. But the whole surgery was like having an out-of-body experience. The weirdest thing was, and I don't want anybody to get freaked out, I was awake when they were sewing me back up, and I could feel the stitches in my head. And then being wheeled out of the operating room completely awake. That was just a surreal experience. But fortunately, she was able to remove about 95 to 99% of the tumor, and I lost my speech temporarily, thanks be to God. But I had to go to speech therapy classes between surgery and radiation to basically relearn how to speak again. And if anybody, I know a lot of you guys called, if anybody taught that 6 weeks after surgery, I couldn't get it out. But after they removed the tumor, they mapped the whole entire genome of my tumor. And there was a specific genetic mutation inside the tumor that was more favorable and more receptive to certain types of treatment. And they later tailored my treatment plan around that genetic mutation. The doctor said there's only 3% of brain cancer patients have that specific genetic mutation. And this isn't on my speech, I'm going off topic here. But last week, I met with a longtime client, a widow, and that was probably the first my dad and I called on. They live in Sopchoppy, Florida. If you blink, you drive through it. It's not much there. But she wanted to go over policies, and I was telling her, she knows my story, but I was telling her about the 3%. And her son's a priest too. She said the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I was like, never thought about that. That's a good way to look at it. So, and absolutely wild. So 6 weeks after surgery, we went back to Shands to find out the game plan for my treatments. When we met with a radiation oncologist, he explained to us that there's basically 3 ways of finding out you have this type of tumor. 1, you could have killed over and died, and we might have found it in your autopsy. 2, you could have had a major stroke, which would have caused untold amount of damage. 3, the seizure is what I had, which was the least damaging form of finding out. Remember, I said we were just settled into our pew 5 minutes before. If I had the kids in the car, I think if I would had the seizure 10 minutes earlier, who knows what would have happened. And I truly believe in a higher power, that God has a hand in all of us. And that I truly have a guardian angel looking out for me. And there's a reason why I'm still here today, standing in front of you today. We found out my treatment plan, And basically, I had to do 6 weeks of radiation, 6 weeks of chemo. Luckily, I didn't have to do the harsher form of IV chemo. I got to do the pill form of chemo. Concurrently with radiation, take a month off and start what they called maintenance chemo, which consists of 12 rounds where they triple the dose of chemo medication. So I take it for 5 days and 23 days off. And I finished that last July. During my 4 to 6 month sabbatical, let's call it, I had a lot of time to reflect on things. And I felt it was the first time in my adult life that I was able to sit back and just take a break and slow down. And I came away with a few takeaways. 1, I learned you have to be your best client. Too many times, insurance and financial advisors are their own worst clients. I was prepared for worst case scenario. My father's been in the Knights of Columbus for 32 years and a past NAFIC president. And he always says to be prepared for the worst and hope for the best. I've heard him tell clients this. I can't even count the number of times he said that to them. So my financial house was taken care of, so I could solely focus on my own recovery. So if you're not your best client, I challenge you when you get home after this meeting to make sure your financial house is in order while you still can. 2, you have to be willing to ask for help. Don't let your ego get in the way. We cannot do everything on our own. I found out through this whole process that 99% of the people are more than willing to help. You just have to ask. In the state of Florida, if you have a seizure, you can't drive for 6 months. They basically took my license away. I just add it to the list. And my wife, my parents, my in-laws, my father-in-law would drive me to Gainesville for my radiation treatments, and he'd pick me up on Friday and drive me back to Tallahassee for 6. And my office manager, Julie, who's a gift from the heavens, and all my friends chauffeured me around for those 6 months. My wife or my mother would drive me the 60 miles round trip for the 6 weeks every day of radiation appointments. And when I finished up radiation at the end of June 19, I was like, my paycheck's getting light here. I've got to get back to work. And who can I find to drive me? So if I had appointments in town, Julie and I would carpool. Basically, she'd pick me up, take me to the office, and take me home when I was done for the day. And my clients knew my situation. They would come to the office. But I still had to find someone to drive me around to when I had appointments in Panama City or Jacksonville. And so I thought about it for a few days, and I decided to call one of my clients and good friends, and that's him right there on the right, and Wellman Pippin. And he was more than happy to help. And actually, we have him on retainer as the vice president of the Spinelli Agency of Transportation. So, and he texted me 15 minutes before. I haven't talked to him in 6 months. He texted me 15 minutes before the speech. I said, "Are your ears burning?" But he was more than happy to help, and I'll be forever grateful for him for those few months. He told me later on that when he was going through cancer treatments out in California and he had no family there, he said that his friends drove him to every radiation appointment he had, and he was just paying it forward. You can't be afraid to ask for help. 3, the outpouring of support from the Knights of Columbus members, fellow advisors, and their families was tremendous. Our family is truly grateful for all the phone calls, texts, cards, and meals that they bought for us. My brother, who was in college in the middle of his junior year of baseball at the time, and had no plans to be an advisor with the Knights, but saw firsthand the outpouring of support I received from fellow Knights advisors and fellow Knights of Columbus, brother Knights, that he felt called to join our order. And he's been an advisor with us since December of last year. I personally believe our fraternal system is needed now more than ever. Thinking back, the sense that I wasn't in this fight alone and that I had a whole society and community rooting and praying for my recovery was an overwhelming feeling. In society today, men and women are in desperate need for a sense of community and are so ill prepared for a shock to their financial house. It is our responsibility to actively go out in our communities and ask men and women to join our respective societies and help them get their financial house in order. I'll repeat that. It is our responsibility to actively go out into our communities and ask men and women to join our respective societies and help them get their financial house in order. 4, I feel my whole life has been in preparation for this moment. From the soccer games in grade school, all the Little League practices, the 8 years of high school and college football, to starting my career in the insurance and financial services industry with the Knights of Columbus. It prepared me for the daily grind and struggle I was undertaking. The 5 a.m. workouts, the 2-a-day practices, all the no's I received and still to receive to this day, prepared me for this moment. Having the discipline to get up and show up every single day, it prepared me for the fight of my life. My mom used to tell us kids, when we didn't want to go to school or that day or generally didn't want to do something, she'd just say, just muddle through the day. Just muddle through it. Just get it done and get it over with and move on. I didn't realize at the time just how profound her words of wisdom would turn out to be. So I took that same approach with a cancer diagnosis. You must embrace the process and you must become comfortable in uncomfortable situations. And 5, in life, sometimes we feel we want to control everything. As advisors, I sat through a focus session one time at MDRT, and the lady was talking about having the magazines lined in her office, and having the books. And so from that to we want to control the underwriting process. But some things in life are just out of our control, like a cancer diagnosis, natural disaster, death in the family, bad accident, whatever. But do you know what you can control? The response. How do you respond to the adversity put in front of you in life? It's not about getting knocked down. During my football days, I got knocked down more times than I can count. But that's going to happen in life. It is how you respond to getting knocked down. Do you make a choice to continue to lay down, or do you get back up and fight? I had 2 choices that day in the hospital room. Either I could literally roll over and die, or I could fight it with every ounce of my being. I chose to fight. Fight for my wife, my children, my parents, and my brother and sisters, all my friends, and all the ones who've gone through it before me. I chose to fight and will continue to fight to set the example for them. My senior season of football, our team motto was, whatever it takes. And as I was lying alone on that Saturday, after everybody went home in that hospital bed, when I was first diagnosed, I thought back to that motto, as cheesy as it was. And I made a pact with myself that I was going to do whatever it took to get better and approach it one day at a time, whatever it takes. Thank you. God bless.